There's so much stuff out there, you know, about my life, about Elvis's life, about our life, about, you know, people in our lives.
Priscilla Presley kept quiet for almost 50 years. She smiled in interviews. She protected his image. She built his empire from the ashes. But in September 2025, at 80 years old, she finally told the truth about the night she walked into something that humiliated her, about the guns and the mood swings. About what really happened when Elvis found out about Mike Stone, and about why a 14-year-old girl, Music, ended up living in Graceland before she even finished high school. She still calls him the love of her life, but love and control are not the same thing. The real story will shock you. Priscilla Ann Wagner was born on Music, May 24, 1945 at a naval hospital in Brooklyn. From the very start, her life carried a quiet sense of loss. Her father, James Wagner, was a Navy pilot who had married her mother, and, after several years together, and for a short time, they lived like a normal young family. Then when Priscilla was only 6 months old, her father died in a plane crash. She grew up without ever knowing him, and her mother had to face the world alone with a baby in her arms. Those early years felt unsettled. And worked hard to move forward, and in 1948, she married an Air Force officer named Paul Bolu. He later adopted Priscilla and gave her his last name. From then on, life became a long series of moves. One year they lived in Texas, then somewhere else, and then somewhere else again. Military life meant packing bags before she could feel at home. By 1959, the family had moved overseas to Germany and settled in Wiesbaden, where housing shortages forced them into an odd apartment that had once been part of an old brothel. Nothing ever, Music, felt steady for long. At school, she stayed quiet and kept to herself. Lunchtime was the hardest part of the day because she usually sat alone, watching groups of friends talk and laugh while she felt like she did not belong anywhere. Back home, the family kept growing, and soon she had younger brothers and sisters filling the house with noise. Still, she often felt like she was drifting through someone else's life. Everything changed one evening on September 13, 1959. Priscilla was 14 when she went to a small gathering at a diner hosted by an Air Force officer named Curry Grant. The room was busy and loud, filled with soldiers and music, and somewhere in the middle of it all stood Elvis Presley, already famous around the world and serving in the Army. He noticed her navy and white sailor dress right away and asked to talk. They spent hours together that night listening to records and sharing stories. And when the evening ended, he kissed her goodbye. It was her first, Music, real kiss, and when she went home, she felt as if something inside her life had quietly shifted. Her parents were cautious and demanded to meet him before allowing anything more. Elvis arrived in full uniform with his father beside him and spoke politely about curfews and responsibility. He promised that she would be safe whenever she was with him. And somehow, Music, he managed to win their trust. From then on, Elvis became the center of her world. She still wanted to live like a normal teenager and go out with friends, but Elvis insisted on being there whenever she met other boys. If she went on a date, he would sit in the back seat, Music, or at a nearby table, watching closely and making sure nothing went too far. Soldiers on the base started whispering about the strange situation, and rumors spread that the shy girl had become Elvis's special project. He gave her gifts and attention and made her feel important. Yet, at the same time, her world kept getting smaller. Late at night, she would sit with him while he played records and talked about how lonely fame had made him. He, Music, spoke often about his mother, who had died the year before. And those conversations pulled Priscilla closer because she felt he needed her. On the base, people began calling her Elvis's kid girlfriend, and the name followed her everywhere. When Elvis prepared to leave Germany in March 1960, she felt her world slipping, Music, away. Photographers caught pictures of her holding his portrait and newspapers turned the story into gossip. When he finally departed, she locked herself in her room for days, barely eating or sleeping while reporters chased rumors about his life back in America. Elvis called from time to time and promised they would see each other again. And those calls were enough to keep her waiting. One night in early February, 1960, she stayed at his house without supervision for the first time. They talked for hours about his life and his fears and the strange emptiness he felt behind the fame. He held her close but told her they would wait for the right time before going any further. When she left the next morning, she felt changed in a way she could not explain. From that point on, her life revolved around him completely. For a while, their connection lived through letters and phone calls across the ocean. Then, in 1962, Elvis invited her to visit the United States. He arranged everything carefully. She flew first class with a story prepared for anyone who asked questions. And while her parents believed she was sightseeing in Los Angeles, she quietly traveled with Elvis to Las Vegas. Each day, letters arrived at her parents' house so nothing would seem suspicious. When she returned home, she wanted more than visits. By Christmas, she was asking to move to America for good. Her parents finally agreed after Elvis promised she would live with his family, finish school, and one day marry him. In March 1963, she boarded a plane and left Germany behind. At first, the plan seemed simple, but soon she was living full-time at Graceland instead of with Elvis's parents. She enrolled in a Catholic school nearby and tried to keep up the appearance of a normal student. Yet her real life happened inside the gates of the mansion. Elvis paid for everything she needed. And slowly he began shaping how she looked and behaved. Her hair turned jet black and rose into the tall style he liked. Her clothes matched his taste. Even her makeup followed his instructions. Days began with school and ended in Elvis's private war. LD nights stretched late because his schedule ruled the house and she tried to keep pace with the rhythm of his life. Outside the gates, rumors grew. But inside, she felt cut off from everyone she once knew. Years later, she would describe that time as living inside a beautiful cage. Everything changed again on August 16, 1977, when Elvis died suddenly and left behind a fortune that was close to collapse. The estate that should have been worth millions was drowning in debt, with expenses piling up and bad deals draining the money away. Graceland alone cost hundreds of thousands each year to maintain, and huge tax bills, threatened to swallow what remained. Priscilla stepped forward because there was no one else who could do it. After Elvis's father died, she became responsible for protecting the estate for Lisa Marie. And when she looked into the records, she found chaos everywhere. Money had been spent, without limits. Expensive gifts had been handed out freely. Royalties had been sold under poor terms, and Colonel Tom Parker had been taking a share far larger than anyone else in the business. Instead of giving up, she began fighting back. She challenged Parker in court and forced changes, that brought money back into the estate. She tracked down profits from unofficial merchandise and pulled control away from people who had taken advantage of Elvis's name. Many advisors suggested selling Graceland to cover the debts, but she refused because it was Lisa Marie's home and the heart of Elvis's story. Slowly, a new idea took shape. If fans wanted to see where Elvis had lived, maybe the mansion itself could become the answer. In 1981, she brought in a businessman named Jack Sodden to help turn the plan into reality. The project required money they did not have, so they sold thousands of tickets in advance before the doors even opened. On June 7, 1982, visitors finally walked through Graceland. Fans filled the rooms in numbers no one expected. And within weeks, the project had already paid for itself. People came from everywhere to stand in the jungle room or look at the airplanes and cars that told the story of Elvis's life. The mansion that once drained money now began to support the entire estate. With that success came new growth. Priscilla took control of the rundown strip of shops across the street and replaced bootleg merchandise with official stores and exhibits. Lawsuits protected Elvis's image, while licensing deals spread his music and story around the world. What had once, been close to bankruptcy grew into a thriving business that secured the future for Lisa Marie and preserved Elvis's legacy. While rebuilding the estate, she also started building a new life for herself. Only a few years after Elvis's death, she stepped onto television as a host on a program called Those Amazing Animals. The show followed unusual animal stories from trained chimps to daring handlers working with snakes and sharks. At first, she seemed quiet and careful, but week by week, she grew more confident in front of the camera. The experience helped her find a new voice that belonged only to her. Soon after, she took on her first acting role in an episode of The Fall Guy. She played a stunt woman and performed demanding action scenes that pushed her physically. The work left bruises and aches, yet she welcomed the challenge because it proved she could stand on her own. Another project followed when she traveled to Thailand to film Music, Love is Forever. The shoot was difficult and exhausting. The heat was intense and the locations were remote. Yet, Music, pushed through long days and harsh conditions to finish the film. By the time it ended, she knew she had crossed into a new chapter of her life. Television audiences got to know her even better when she joined the cast of Dallas as Jenna Wade. The role lasted for years and turned her into a familiar face in homes around the world. Viewers followed her character through love and conflict while she quietly built a career far removed from the shadow she once lived under. She even stepped into darker roles, including a tense appearance in Tales from the Crypt, where she played a woman caught in Music, a twisted scheme that spiraled into violence. The part surprised many people who still thought of her only as Elvis's former wife, and it showed she was willing to take risks. Then came the moment that changed everything again. In 1988, she appeared in The Naked Gun as Jane Spencer, a role that opened the door to comedy in a way no one expected. She had never done comic acting before, and the directors wanted her to stay serious while chaos unfolded around her. On set, she found herself falling downstairs, bumping into walls, and performing awkward physical gags that made the crew laugh, Music, between takes. When the film was
eased, audiences loved her calm delivery in the middle of the madness. And suddenly, she had a new identity on screen. More roles followed in the adventures of Ford Fairlane. She played a sharp and dangerous character caught in a wild detective story filled with music and crime. The tone was rougher than anything she had done before. Yet, she leaned into it and showed a different side of herself. She returned to the Naked Gun series in the years that followed, including a memorable scene where she shared a playful moment with Leslie Nielsen Music that audiences talked about for years. The films kept her busy through the early 90s, and with each performance, she became more comfortable letting go and enjoying the absurd humor. Behind the scenes, she stood firm on the choices that mattered to her. When one scene pushed beyond what she wanted to do, she refused and insisted on staying within her limits, even when it caused tension. Holding that line helped her protect the identity she had fought to build. By the time the final film in the series arrived in 1994, she had grown from a nervous beginner into Music, a confident performer. The story ended with one last burst of comedy and chaos, closing a chapter that had taken Music, her from uncertainty into independence. Looking back, her life moved in long turns that never seemed predictable. Loss led to change. Change led to struggle. Struggle opened doors she never expected. Step by step, she kept moving forward, building a path that was finally her own. And on May 13, 1988, Priscilla Presley stood inside Bloomingdale's in New York with cameras flashing around her and a long line of shoppers waiting to see her. From 4 o'clock in the afternoon until evening, she greeted people, signed bottles, and sprayed Music perfume testers with her own hands. The fragrance was called Moments, and this launch meant more to her than just selling perfume. It felt like the first real step she took on her own, away from the shadow that had followed her for years. The scent came from memories she carried from Graceanne, from the jasmine and vanilla flowers that filled the warm air on quiet nights when Elvis was away on tour. She tested dozens of blends until one finally Music felt right. Something soft but also strong enough to last. When the perfume reached stores, it surprised everyone and earned $10 million in its first year. Buyers kept coming back for more, drawn to the deep mix of tuberose, Music, leather, and warm notes that stayed on the skin long after the first spray. During the launch, she talked easily with strangers, telling small stories about Elvis and the scents he used. and people who came to shop ended up staying just to listen. Many still saw her only as Elvis's former wife. But she pushed past music that and tied the fragrance to Elvis Presley Enterprises, so her personal story became part of the business. By the end of the evening, the lines stretched across the store, and one woman said the perfume felt like a secret romance, captured in a bottle. That early success opened the door to bigger plans and proved she could build something that belonged only to her. Moments soon became known as her signature fragrance. It sold for $65 a bottle, which felt expensive
at the time, yet people bought it anyway. The mix of jasmine and vanilla reminded her of nights at Graceland when the garden stayed warm and quiet, and she said she wanted the scent to feel alive in the same way. Some people thought the fragrance was too bold and complained about the strong notes hidden underneath the flowers, but others became loyal customers and said it reminded them of Elvis. She stayed deeply involved in every step, testing samples again and again until the final version matched the feeling she carried in her memories. The profits helped improve Graceland and turned what began as a personal project into a serious business. A few years later, she introduced another fragrance called Experiences. This one felt warmer and deeper with musk, music, and amber resting beneath soft floral notes. She presented it during long television appearances where viewers could call in and order bottles while she talked about the inspiration behind the scent. Those broadcasts lasted for hours. Yet, people stayed on the line waiting to speak with her or place an order. Many buyers said the fragrance brought back memories of Elvis and the nights they imagined he lived behind the gates of Graceland. Sales grew quickly and helped expand the business even further, while Priscilla kept appearing on television to demonstrate the perfumes herself and share stories that kept viewers listening. In 1996, she released Indian Summer, a brighter fragrance filled with citrus and light floral notes inspired by Elvis's years performing in Las Vegas. Department stores hosted special events where fans lined up early just to see her and buy signed bottles. Some people waited overnight, turning each appearance into a gathering that felt almost like a concert crowd. The scent reminded her of the energy she felt backstage during Elvis's shows, and she described it as a way to capture that excitement in a bottle. Stores reported sharp increases in sales during those events, and the perfumes became closely linked with visits to Graceland and Elvis memorabilia. Not every release went smoothly. In 1998, Roses and More struggled at first when early production problems and rumors about the formula pushed buyers away. Bottles stayed on shelves and advisors told her to move on, but she refused to give up. Instead, she spoke directly to customers during television appearances and explained how much the fragrance meant to her. She talked about roses at Graceland and the memories tied to them, and people slowly began to return. The formula was improved and sales rose again until the perfume found its audience. What looked like a failure turned into another success, and the recovery strengthened her confidence even more. By the time the new century arrived, her line of perfumes had earned more than $50 million. The income supported major projects connected to Graceland and helped stabilize Elvis Presley Enterprises at a time when expenses were rising, music, fast. The profits also helped build the Heartbreak Hotel across from Graceland, giving visitors a place to stay while they explored the estate. Tourists arrived, music, by the hundreds of thousands each year, and many bought the fragrances as souvenirs before they left. What began with a single perfume had grown into a business that supported the entire Presley legacy and secured its future. In September 2000, Priscilla stepped into a very different role when she joined MGM's board of directors. At 55, she was no longer only a public figure connected to Elvis. She now had influence, music, inside a major studio, helping guide projects and decisions that shaped how Elvis would be remembered on screen. Some people believed she used her position to protect his image and avoid stories that focused on darker chapters of his life. At the same time, rumors followed her because of her long connection to Scientology, a path she had turned to after Elvis died while trying to rebuild her life, music, and help her daughter through difficult years. The gossip never fully stopped. Yet, she continued working quietly in the background, helping develop projects that kept Elvis's story alive for new audiences. A few years later, she found another way to help people through her work with the Dream Foundation. As an ambassador, she met patients whose final wish was often tied to Elvis or to Grace Ann. Some wanted to visit the mansion one last time, while others asked for small pieces of that world to be recreated in hospital rooms. She supported many of these wishes herself, spending time with families and making sure each moment felt special. The work grew from her own experience with loss and gave her a way to turn grief into something meaningful for others. Then the story widens and you start seeing how complicated love becomes when pride, music, gets involved. During her talk tour, she talks about a painful moment from the collapse of their marriage when Elvis found out about her affair with Mike Stone. She describes Elvis, music, not as a monster in that moment, but as a man trying to pull back control when he could feel it slipping. She calls it desperate. She makes the point that it was not romance and it was not healing. It was a last attempt to prove something to himself and to prove something to her right when the relationship was already breaking. That honesty makes the room go quiet. Even through a screen, because it is not written to shock. It is written like she is finally done carrying it alone. And while she is telling you all of this, she is also showing you what came after. She explains how she rebuilt her life and learned to stand on her own name, not just his. Music, that is where she talks about turning Elvis Presley Enterprises into a real business. And she frames it as more than money. She frames it as taking control of the story, the property, and the legacy. Because she had learned what happens when you do not protect yourself. She does not write like someone looking for pity. She writes like someone who learned how to work. Around the same time, she stepped into another, music, spotlight, and it looked almost unreal. At the 2025 Venice Film Festival, a career montage played and the room stood up for a long ovation. In that moment, she was not just Elvis's ex-wife. She was a woman with her own history, her own survival, music, and her own public weight. Cameras flashed, people cheered, and she looked overwhelmed. Then she said out loud that Elvis was the love of her life. That line landed because it did not sound like a performance. It sounded like a truth that had followed her everywhere, even when she tried to walk away, music, from it. From there, the story keeps threading into the hardest kind of family pain. She connects old wounds to later, music, ones, and you can feel how grief stacks over time. She mentions the weight of losing Lisa Marie and she shows how that loss cracked her all over again. In the middle of all that, she still has to live inside a world where people debate myths, rumors, and conspiracies like they are games. She pushes back against those ideas and talks about Elvis's health, and the reality of what he was going through. She makes it clear she is not interested in fantasy. She is interested in the truth even when the truth is ugly. Then she takes you all the way back to the beginning and it is impossible not to notice how early the power gap was. She describes meeting Elvis when she was only 14 and he was already a superstar. At first it felt like a dream because what teenager would not feel pulled into that kind of attention? But the dream quickly became a controlled, music, world. She writes about calls, constant contact, and the way her normal life began to fade. When she ended up in Graceland, while she was still supposed to be finishing school, she was surrounded by older men, adult rules, and a lifestyle, music, that did not match her age. She also describes how she changed herself to fit what Elvis wanted, even down to hair and clothes. And she admits how that, music, warped her teenage years. The tone is not angry. It is clear. And that clarity makes it even more intense. As the marriage years unfold, she also describes moments of betrayal that hit like a punch. She talks about walking into situations that made her feel humiliated. And she describes the strange closeness of the inner circle where loyalty was promised, but boundaries were often broken. She writes about Elvis's moods, too, and how pills could twist the air inside the house. She describes music, fear, shouting, and guns. And she gives the sense that the home could switch from loving to dangerous in the same night. The way she tells it, the worst part was not one single incident. The worst part was never knowing which version of the day you were about to get.